My question is, a past idea which I think worked well previously, and we clearly were able to afford it and put it in place on a large scale, was basically building council houses that could never be sold and would remain permanently in public ownership, and basically whereby the rent receipts for those public houses, which always remain publicly, to meet the obvious housing need, could go towards help funding it. What's wrong? What's so wrong with that model currently?
Ash?
I think council housing was a great idea. It didn't mean that all council housing was good or all of it was well built, but the basic principle that the state would take responsibility for building housing, it would keep the rents low, and they would be state assets was a really solid one. The big problem was right to buy, because it did two things. One is it severely depleted the public housing stock. There was nowhere near enough being built after that. And two, it was a massive transfer of wealth into private hands. And that would be fine if it all went to first-time buyers, people who were owning the home that they lived in. A significant proportion of homes bought under right to buy are now buy-to-lets. So the same council flat that would have been very reasonable amount in rent is now costing you, upwards of £900 per month, £1,200 per month. And it's an absolute scandal. And what we've replaced it with, housing association flats, social housing, the scam of affordable housing, because it's not actually affordable.
Yeah.
It's nowhere near enough in terms of affordable housing provision. Two, I think a lot of tenants often feel very unhappy with the quality of housing that they get, how inaccessible the people in charge are.
That's always been the case, though, to be fair.
But I think it's something which has gotten even worse. There's even blurrier lines of accountability and responsibility. And it's more expensive than it used to be. So I would be really in favour of seeing an awful lot more council housing. And the last thing I'd say, actually, is out of all of my friends, the only one of them who had a baby in their 20s, right, rather than their 30s, was the couple who've been able to get a council house. They've been able to have a kid, work a reasonable amount of hours, and have a really nice family life, and that's been enabled by council housing.
And that's the thing, of course, is
Sarah.
Is the reason why is because of stability. The biggest problem, I think, of course, all of the costs, all of the destruction of communities that you get, that's another problem with turning council housing into private sector housing, the quality. I will get to that in a second. But one of the biggest problems with the move from social housing, council housing, into private housing is landlord can kick you out whenever they want. That's a power the council does not have. And given that landlords have such a massive monopoly over the control of these assets, and will kick people out at a whim, because we still haven't abolished Section 21 no-fault evictions yet, because the Renters Reform Bill got watered down, is that you never know if you're going to be able to have a house at the end of each month, the end of each contract. Like, how are you going to be able to plan to be able to look after a tiny human for 18 whole years? That's an awful lot of stability that you have to be able to guarantee without there being a publicly owned house available there for you, on top of the amenities that are much worse in these privately built estates, where you don't know if you're going to have a proper hospital to be able to take your child, if you need to, a proper school for them to be able to go to. These provisions haven't been made because we've stripped that all away in favour of the private sector. The quality of the housing is worse because cyclical consumption means they want to get future contracts, and because they don't have any social utility that they're looking towards, they just know that the supply is so low they can build whatever they want and somebody will buy it. And on top of that, they don't build enough high-density housing or enough cheap housing because they want to make what makes them the most profit what is not the most social utility, which of course would be high-density, high-green space housing for councils to be able to have for cheap rents, so that people who are just starting off as young people, especially young people, really need council housing in this country because they can't be able to find a community to be able to build. And that's the biggest thing that council housing reductions has taken away. Like, you don't find community in private rented estates where people come and go at will and people get kicked out and things get sold, bought by investors. It's really tragic how just one simple policy like right to buy has broken up the social fabric of huge swathes of this country.
Absolutely.
Do you actually have council housing in Richmond?
We do have council. Well, it's housing association owned, and I think
not council though.
Well, no, but that's I've got two different local authorities in my constituency. In one local authority, it is primarily housing association. In the other local authority is much more likely to be owned by the council. So it's not a consistent picture even within one constituency. But to Ash's point about lack of accountability when it is housing association, it is that much harder harder. And I have that direct compare and contrast, if you like. I've got local councillors on the ground. If tenants in council housing are having issues, their local councillors can go and bang on the door of the housing team. And that direct accountability, it's removed when it's a housing association property.
Exactly. It's really important. Like, the housing associations have basically become a racket full of people with a bunch of non-jobs, essentially taking a bunch of state money to be able to do social housing. And as has been said, with no accountability, all these layers of bureaucracy, it's far less efficient than if you just had it directly going to the council, which had a department to be able to do this. Obviously, they can't now because all of the budget cuts because of conservative austerity. But even so, even the council houses that do exist still have much better response than you would get in a housing association. Another bottleneck in terms of efficiency with regards to how we've changed social housing is that one of the biggest ways that the state subsidizes housing now isn't through actually providing any of the housing itself. They do housing benefit. Because there's no social housing, they have to pay you to be able to live in some massively extortionate private rented accommodation, subsidizing the private landlord sector. Because that's what Blair did by giving them all buy-to-let mortgages so they could become landlords on the cheap, little petite bourgeois fiefdoms that they could control as little middle-class oiks, right? And then they get to not just take loads of money as rent away from working people in this country that they don't have any other justification for, because rental never really has any justification within a capitalist society, or a socialist one for that matter. And then on top of that, they are taking money from the government because of the fact that they are monopolising how the private housing rented market works. It's insane. So the government, instead of getting money from councils in council rents, it's giving money away to private landlords. So we've paid double for this catastrophic failure of right to buy.
Definitely an issue. Not to say that the tenants in one council get vastly better service than the other. So it's a bit at the margins, but it's just to Ash's point about accountability. But the Liberal Democrats, in our manifesto, we are committing to building 150,000 social homes a year because we have a housing crisis, and there are things we can do around planning, and around all sorts of other adjustments, but fundamentally we need to be building more, and we need to ensure not just that we are building private sector housing, although we need that as well. That is an essential part of the picture, but we do need to focus on the needs of people who are going to need to rent socially.
Liberal Democrats have come out endorsing house communism. That's what that is, right? When the state does a thing, it makes it communism.
Well, when it does a lot of stuff, it's communism.
I don't romanticise the ownership of social housing by council at all. I remember when they owned a lot of the housing stock, and they did not do a great job at all.
Whereas now no one can afford anything.
I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it just shows you. It just shows you what life is like as a fucking lord, as a peer. In that you go, well, the councils when I was growing up, they didn't do a very good job, and maybe they did. They weren't perfect, right? This just shows somebody who's never lived in any rented accommodation ever in the last 20 years. It's all terrible. It's all garbage. I was a renter for 12 years of my adult life. It was never good. It was always bad. And whenever I've gone to council houses, even ex-council houses, I've just been like, it's like stepping into a different reality than the private rented sector that I have known the entirety of my adult life. This guy is chatting shit, living in a tiny little London bubble. He can go fuck himself. And on top of that, we've also got this idea, the fact that because he's a lord and he's a Tory and he's obviously massively well off, he doesn't have to care about the breakdown of community that council housing being sold off got rid of, because that's never a community that he's ever had to experience.
I was about to say, yeah, his community didn't break down. His community are fine. Council housing's what plebs live in.
And as Sarah sort of alluded to, the scale of our housing problem is so big that there's no way that they can close the gap or even make a significant gap because they don't have the money to do that. No, the best protection for tenants is for the housing supply to be massively increased. I am probably feeling the most.
You should have done that then in the last 14 fucking years.
Go ask Theresa Villiers. It's her fault.
Disappointed about the Conservative government's achievements in this area of house building. We should have built many, many more houses.
Okay, what bits of their achievements do you like?
I mean, clearly none. But thing is, right, the problem he's got is he doesn't have to care about whether they build houses or not. Or he doesn't have to care about the ramifications of a policy because he's a lord and he's unelected. The reason why they've not built any houses is because, first of all, Conservative MPs are usually in rural kind of NIMBY seats where it's harder to build housing, to get it through the local blocking of the planning system and local assent towards planning permission. But on top of that, the increase in the housing supply decreases the cost of the commodity. What's the biggest base for the Conservative vote share? It's homeowners. They can't be put into negative equity. They can't have the price of their little nest egg reduced so that people from a generation below them can get on the housing ladder. And this is an artifact of massive privatization of housing. You didn't have to worry about whether or not future planning was going to impact people's housing value because it wasn't such a massive part of our economy in terms of the private sector. It was mostly council for a huge period in the post-war period, so the difference in terms of your personal wealth was usually around the kind of work you did or the job you had. Now the biggest definer of wealth is which generation you were born into to get access to get on the housing ladder, because it's super prohibitive for everybody else, because people from Gen X and the Boomer generation who voted Conservative pulled the ladder up, or even if they voted Blair pulled the ladder up too by taking the housing supply and giving it to landlords with buy-to-let mortgages and continuing to increase prices forever.
Couldn't add anything to it. Perfect.
And we need a societal rethink on this issue, because it's great for the economy to build homes, but it's really great for tenants because it brings the price down and competition.
Yeah, and exactly as Helena just described, that's precisely why they haven't done that.
Mm-hmm.
Up. So, no, I'm really sceptical about the council house distraction, as I would see it.
Distraction.
Again, they don't have to care. He doesn't have to care. He doesn't think of anything outside of like the market lens, because he's been able to spend his entire life in a community that works whilst being able to afford everything. He's never had to experience the life of somebody who relies on stable accommodation to be able to live, who relies on ensuring that they have enough money left over after paying their rent to be able to afford to live. He doesn't have to care because he's gone straight from mummy and daddy's little nest egg into renting a luxury flat and to being a homeowner at 27.
Honestly, come the revolution, I do hope you don't face any distractions.
Let me have a look at his. Let me have a look at his. Let me have a look at his. His life. Oh, well, when you look at that early life, Bethel was educated at the independent, fee-paying Harrow School before going on to study a Scottish Master of Arts at University of Edinburgh. What an absolute surprise that this man's parents were so rich that he went to private school. Literally exactly as I said. Straight from mummy and daddy's nest egg into being a homeowner straight away. Exactly. Why does he have to care about council houses when he was being paid through fucking private school? These people completely living in a different reality.
Lionel. Well, I was a big favour of privatisation of council housing under the Margaret
What a surprise!
Thatcher. I think it was important the councils were not doing a good job, and I think just allowing people...
Whereas the market's doing a cracking job.
Literally, again, like they live in a different reality. How can they think that the private landlords are doing a better job than the council? It's insane. It's insane to me that they think this. Well, it's not insane because they haven't got the experience.
Because many of these people are landlords. So
well, true. Many people are landlords. True, but they don't know the community. They don't know how council housing created a community because they never experienced it. And then on top of that, the big issue, of course, is that they don't have to care about the stability because they're rich enough that housing insecurity is something that is irrelevant to them. I wonder if this guy's early life is available to me over on Wikipedia. I can check out just how much of a privileged silver spoon wanker this guy is. Lyle Barber, British journalist, educated at Dulwich College, an independent school for boys. What a surprise! Oh, another privately educated man. Oh, isn't it crazy how the two people who are state educated on this panel think that social housing is good, and the two privately educated ones think that it's bad? What a turnout for the books. I'm shocked, I tell you. I'm shooketh.
Also, for such a small section of the population who actually go to private school, it's good that they're getting 50% representation on the panel. That's
true.
Nice.
7%.
The right to own their own home in a democracy is a good thing. But we have, 40 years on, a massive housing crisis. We've got an affordable homes crisis.
Wow. But I thought the free market would solve everything.
I mean, to be fair, if you do believe in the free market, you will think that our planning system is way too unfree and it's too restricted and too regulated. And you know what? That's a reasonable position to take. If we'd have just deregulated the planning sector, we would have built loads of houses to deal with this new demand and everything would have been fine. I don't think that necessarily would have worked. There'd be too much land banking. There is always a problem in terms of the fixed supply of land. Land is the most important commodity, which is why Georgism is based, of course. Land value tax down here, I'm absolutely in favour of a land value tax. But even outside of that, like there are land banking, institutional investors will bid up the price, like we saw in the run-up to the global financial crisis. Huge amounts of new housing, price didn't go down at all because speculators were buying it because they knew prices would increase. So I don't even necessarily buy that argument either. And as you say, like, not only do you have the problem with the finite amount of land, which to be fair, we have still loads of land that's not used, but that is competition with farming,
but the point
for
is,
example.
you do have to take it into account. You can't just let it, run and run. And of course, there's geographic and ecological things that have to be taken into account that a company never would if left alone.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, we should have the problem with like the terrible build quality of private houses. The best build quality of housing, if any housing stock in this country, is the council housing. It's all the best. Like, it just is.
Yeah.
You can't argue with that.
And therefore, there needs to be, as said, a great deal more houses built. I think the house builders, by the way, who've had a very good ride for the last few years, could do more in that respect. And I don't know how you allocate, because it doesn't feel very market friendly, a certain amount in places where there is council stock.
It doesn't seem very market friendly. So you're just a market religionist. It doesn't matter, even though the market isn't going to solve the problem, you're still looking for a market solution to a problem it can't solve. You're a religion. You're just a devotee, a fucking worshipper of this invisible hand as it fingers all of us.
Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.